Everyone knows the fall of China's last imperial dynasty was the result of corruption, foreign aggression, and internal rebellion. But what if I told you that in the summer of 1900, one rain-soaked telegraph cable, yes, an actual physical wire, might have accelerated the Qing Empire's collapse by years? It's a story hidden in the shadows of the Boxer Rebellion, buried under battles and treaties. Yet it begins with something as fragile as wet paper and failing electricity. Our investigation starts not in the Forbidden City, but on a storm-lashed night in Tianjin, when a message meant to calm a crisis was delayed long enough to turn it into a disaster. The Qing court in Beijing was already walking a political tightrope. Empress Dowager Cixi, the real power behind the throne, was caught between foreign powers demanding stability and the violent Boxer militias promising to drive out the foreign devils. The Eight-Nation Alliance, Britain, Japan, Russia, Germany, France, the United States, Italy, and Austria-Hungary, was mobilizing in response to attacks on their legations. In moments like this, speed of information was everything. A single day could mean the difference between negotiation and war. But in July 1900, the northern provinces of China were battered by torrential rains that flooded streets, swelled rivers, and crucially, soaked the underground telegraph lines running between Tianjin and Beijing. Telegraphy in China was still a relatively new technology, introduced only a few decades earlier and often mistrusted by conservative officials. Wires ran along exposed poles and through rudimentary underground channels. Heavy rainfall could seep into insulation, causing short circuits and garbling transmissions into unreadable nonsense. That night, a critical message from foreign diplomats in Tianjin, offering a last chance for truce before a full-scale assault on Beijing, was tapped out in Morse code and sent toward the capital. But somewhere along that line, water met copper, and the words that could have bought time for the Qing court never made it through intact. Instead of a plea for negotiation, Beijing received fragmented phrases that seemed to confirm that foreign troops were advancing without pause. In the palace, paranoia was already running high. Rumors swirled that foreign armies planned to depose Cixi, seize the young Guangxu emperor, and carve China into colonies. Without the full, clear text of the telegraph, Cixi's advisors assumed the worst. And in times of fear, worst-case scenarios often become self-fulfilling. Within hours, the court issued orders to fortify Beijing and prepare for siege, a decision that all but ensured that the Eight-Nation forces would see the Qing as irreversibly hostile. The soaked telegraph line had done more than fail. It had twisted a potential pause in fighting into the spark for its escalation. And from that moment, events began to move faster than the Qing leadership could control. To understand why a single garbled message mattered so much, we have to rewind to the tense, volatile summer of 1900. The Boxer Rebellion was not a neat, organized uprising. It was a chaotic blend of grassroots militancy, superstition, and political desperation. The Righteous and Harmonious Fists, or Boxers, began as a rural anti-foreign movement in Shandong province, smashing railway tracks, cutting telegraph lines, and killing Christian converts. By late spring, their numbers swelled into the tens of thousands, and their marches toward Beijing had the blessing, or at least the tacit approval, of powerful figures in the Qing court. At the center of this political storm stood Empress Dowager Cixi, a master manipulator of court intrigue for nearly 4 decades. Publicly, she portrayed herself as a guardian of tradition against foreign encroachment. Privately, she was balancing 2 sets of demands, the hardliners urging her to unleash the Boxers as a weapon, and the moderates warning her that antagonizing the West would invite disaster. The Guangxu emperor, technically the ruler, was little more than a prisoner under her watch. Meanwhile, foreign powers had their own cast of characters: Britain's Sir Claude MacDonald, Japan's Colonel Shibagoro, and U.S. Minister Edwin Conger, all men trapped inside the legation quarter in Beijing, watching the city turn into a battlefield. On June 20th, the murder of German envoy Baron von Ketteler on his way to the Zhongli Yamen, the Qing Foreign Affairs Office, triggered an almost complete diplomatic collapse. Within hours, the Eight-Nation Alliance began organizing a relief expedition from Tianjin to Beijing. The first attempt, led by British Vice Admiral Edward Seymour, was a disaster. Boxers and Qing regular troops cut the railway lines and forced his force to retreat with heavy casualties. It was in this climate of mutual suspicion and repeated blunders that the telegraph incident occurred. By early July, a second, much larger relief force was preparing to march from Tianjin, but there was still a narrow window for negotiation. Senior Qing officials in Tianjin, recognizing the overwhelming firepower of the foreign coalition, drafted a telegram to Beijing urging Cixi to consider a ceasefire and allow foreign diplomats safe passage out of the capital. That message, factual, cautious, and potentially face-saving, could have given Cixi political cover to de-escalate. But nature intervened. In the days leading up to its transmission, the Haihe River overflowed its banks after relentless rain. Telegraph offices in Tianjin reported water damage to underground cables, and operators resorted to drying connections over coal stoves. When the ceasefire message was finally tapped out, the electrical signal encountered soaked insulation along the Beijing line, scattering dots and dashes into incoherence. What arrived in the capital was a fractured string of phrases, stripped of nuance, suggesting that foreign forces were mobilizing for an unstoppable assault, without mention of any peace proposal. In a palace already primed to expect treachery, the absence of those few crucial words would change the entire course of the dynasty's final crisis. In the heat of Beijing's sweltering July, the garbled telegram was placed in front of Cixi's closest advisors. What they read was not a plea for a ceasefire, but an apparent confirmation of their worst fears. The foreigners were gathering an overwhelming army at Tianjin and had no interest in negotiation. Without the missing lines about safe passage and diplomatic resolution, the message looked like a warning to brace for siege, not an opportunity for peace. The court, already polarized, tipped decisively toward the hardliners. Prince Duan, a fierce supporter of the Boxers and an advocate for using the crisis to expel all foreign influence from China, seized on the faulty telegram as proof that any talk of compromise was a trap. He argued that the Qing Dynasty's only chance for survival was to stand with the Boxers in full-scale resistance, portraying the coming battle as a righteous defense of the empire's sovereignty. Cixi, calculating as always, weighed the risks. She knew the dynasty's legitimacy was tied to appearing strong in the face of foreign aggression. And now, thanks to a few blurred and water-damaged words, the diplomatic options seemed to have evaporated. On July 21st, she made the fateful decision. Qing regular troops would fight alongside the Boxers, and the siege of the legation quarter would continue with full imperial backing. Outside the palace walls, this meant intensifying artillery fire, cutting off food and water to the besieged diplomats, and tightening defenses against the advancing Allied forces. But the eight-nation alliance was not standing still. In Tianjin, Japanese General Yamaguchi Motumi and British General Alfred Ghazali were coordinating an unprecedented multinational march on Beijing, with over 20,000 troops from Britain, Japan, Russia, the United States, France, Germany, Italy, and Austria-Hungary. By August 4th, the coalition was on the move, advancing along the Peiho River under punishing summer heat. The decision to resist at all costs, driven in part by a single corrupted telegram, meant that the Qing now faced not just punitive demands, but the military might of half the industrialized world converging on their capital. The chain of cause and effect was tightening. What might have been an ugly but survivable diplomatic settlement was mutating into a confrontation the Qing could not possibly win. And every step the relief force took toward Beijing shortened the dynasty's clock. By August 14, 1900, the Allied troops stormed Beijing. The siege of the legation quarter collapsed in a matter of hours, and the imperial court was thrown into chaos. Cixi, disguised as a humble peasant, fled the Forbidden City alongside the Guangxu Emperor, beginning a desperate westward journey to Xi'an. The once mighty Qing were now fugitives in their own land. In the following months, the victors imposed the Boxer Protocol of 1901, a treaty so severe it was less a peace agreement than a sentence of slow strangulation. China was forced to pay an indemnity of 450 million taels of silver over 39 years, with interest, and accept permanent foreign garrisons in Beijing. The dynasty's authority, already fragile, was shattered. Intellectuals in Shanghai and Canton looked at the humiliated court and saw a relic, incapable of protecting the nation. Reformers like Kang Yuwei and Liang Qichao, once exiled or silenced, gained a growing audience calling for constitutional monarchy or outright revolution. And just 11 years later, the Xinhai Revolution swept the Qing from power entirely, ending over 2,000 years of imperial rule. It's impossible to say if a complete, undamaged telegram could have saved the dynasty, but we can trace the dominoes. A summer storm in 1900 damaged the undersea cables. The garbled message reached Beijing stripped of nuance. The court chose war over negotiation. The war brought the Allies to Beijing's gates. The aftermath hollowed out the Qing's legitimacy, setting the stage for its fall. Sometimes history doesn't turn on grand speeches or decisive battles, but on a few missing lines of text, dissolved in seawater halfway between continents. And that's why we dig into these moments. Because in the smallest, almost invisible details, you can find the hidden levers of history. If you want more stories that uncover these quiet but world-shaping turning points, like, share, and subscribe to The Domino Effect, where we reveal the unseen chain reactions that shaped our world.